The telegram arrived on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning, Lydia Hartwell had already packed everything she owned into one suitcase. She didn't let herself think too hard about what she was leaving. There wasn't much to leave. A rented room above a laundry in Cincinnati, a job folding other people's shirts for 11 hours a day, a landlord who'd started knocking on her door in the evenings for reasons that had nothing to do with rent, and Clara, sweet 2-year-old Clara, who didn't understand any of it but could feel her mother's fear the way children always can, in the tightness of a held hand, in the speed of footsteps on stairs. The telegram had come from a man named Douglas Fenwick, a rancher in the Montana Territory. He'd placed a notice in the Western Homestead Circular seeking a bride, a woman of sound character, willing to work, willing to relocate. His letter described 200 acres, a good well, a house with a stone fireplace. He wrote carefully, with decent grammar, and said he was a man who believed in plain dealing. Lydia had written back twice before agreeing. She was not naive. She was 26 years old and had already learned what happened to women who trusted too quickly. But the landlord's knocking had gotten louder. Clara had started waking in the night from sounds in the hallway, and Lydia was running out of options the way a lamp runs out of oil, slowly, then all at once. So she packed the suitcase, tucked Clara against her hip, bought a train ticket as far as Mill Haven, Montana, which was the nearest stop to Fenwick's land. She told herself it was a reasonable decision. She told herself that repeatedly, all the way through Ohio and Illinois, and into the strange, flat endlessness of the plains. The train was 3 hours late pulling into Mill Haven. By the time it stopped, the sky had gone the color of a bruise, dark purple at the edges, black at the center, and the temperature had dropped fast. Winter on the frontier didn't ease in. It arrived like a door slamming. Lydia stepped onto the platform with Clara in one arm and the suitcase in the other and stood there while the other passengers dispersed around her. A family with too much luggage. A pair of men in canvas coats heading for the mining camps. A woman who seemed to know exactly where she was going and walked there without looking back. Within 10 minutes, Lydia was the only person left on the platform. She looked up and down the length of the station. A single lamp hung near the ticketing window, swaying in the wind. The station master had already retreated inside. The street beyond the station building was empty except for a dog crossing it slowly, indifferent to everything. Douglas Fenwick was not there. She waited. Clara woke up from her light doze against Lydia's shoulder, looked around with the confused expression of a child suddenly aware that something is wrong, and started to whimper. "Shh," Lydia said. "It's all right. He's just late." She didn't believe it when she said it. She knocked on the station master's window. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with a thick gray mustache and the expression of someone who had seen too many situations exactly like this one. "I'm supposed to be met by a man named Douglas Fenwick," Lydia said. "He'd be coming from a ranch east of town. Have you seen him?" The station master looked at her for a moment, then at Clara, then back at her. "No, ma'am. Would you know where his ranch is? Is there someone who might carry a message?" "It's 9 o'clock at night," he said. Not unkindly, but not kindly either, just as a fact. "Yes," Lydia said. "I'm aware." He let her sit in the waiting room. She was grateful for that. The room was small and smelled of coal smoke and old wood, and the bench was hard, but it was out of the wind. Clara fell back asleep. Lydia sat with her arms wrapped around her daughter and watched the lamp on the wall and tried to think. She had 43 cents. She'd spent nearly everything on the train ticket, keeping back just enough for a meal on the journey. She had no family she could send a telegram to. Her mother had died 4 years ago, her father long before that, and the one aunt she'd known in her childhood had moved somewhere south that Lydia couldn't remember. She had Douglas Fenwick's telegram in her coat pocket, folded into quarters. She took it out and read it again, as if something in the careful handwriting might explain where he was. "I will meet the Thursday evening train. I am a man of my word." That was the last line. She folded it back up. At 11 o'clock, the station master came out with his coat on and told her he was locking up. "Is there a hotel?" Lydia asked. "One, Mrs. Alderman's, on the main street. $1 a night." She had 43 cents. "Thank you," Lydia said, and carried Clara back out into the cold. The wind had gotten worse. It moved through the gaps in her coat and found the places where she was thinnest, and Clara stirred against her shoulder and made small sounds of discomfort that Lydia couldn't do anything about. She walked to the edge of the platform and stood there for a moment, looking down the road that led east toward the land Douglas Fenwick had described in his letter. 200 acres, a stone fireplace, a well that didn't run dry. She had built something in her mind out of those words. Not a fantasy. She was too practical for that. But a shape. A life with edges and corners instead of this endless sliding feeling of having nothing solid to put her hands on. That shape was gone now. She sat back down on the platform bench, which was the only place left to sit, and pulled Clara tighter and let the cold do what it was going to do. Clara had stopped whimpering. She was deeply asleep, one small fist clutched in the fabric of Lydia's collar, and for a moment Lydia just looked at her daughter's face, the soft curve of her cheek, the dark lashes, the particular piece of a child who trusts entirely in the person holding her, and felt something break open in her chest. She had made this decision. She had brought Clara here. She pressed her face against her daughter's hair and didn't let herself cry loudly because there was no one to hear it, and it wouldn't help anything, but her shoulders shook for a long moment in the dark. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she whispered. "I tried." Those were the words she was saying, quietly, into the cold and the dark and the empty station, when she heard the sound of hooves on the frozen ground. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a rushing sound or anything urgent. It was just a steady, unhurried rhythm, the kind of sound a man makes when he's been working a long day and is heading home without any particular hurry because he already knows what's waiting for him there, and it isn't much. A wagon came around the side of the station building and stopped. The horse was a dark bay with a white blaze, and the man holding the reins was someone Lydia had never seen before in her life. He was somewhere in his late 30s or early 40s, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had spent years outdoors and hadn't bothered to apologize for it. He wore a canvas coat and a battered hat, and he didn't look like he'd been expecting to see anything at this station at this hour, because he stopped the wagon and sat there for a moment just looking at her. Lydia looked back at him. She was too tired and too cold and too past the point of useful pride to pretend she was fine. She probably looked exactly like what she was, a woman alone in the dark with a sleeping child and nowhere to go. The man set the brake on the wagon and climbed down. He didn't say anything right away. He walked to where she was sitting, stopped a few feet away, and stood there looking at her in the lamplight. Not in a way that made her feel watched, exactly, but in the way someone looks at a situation when they're trying to understand what it actually is before they say something stupid about it. "You been here long?" he finally asked. "Since 9, Lydia said. He looked at Clara, back at Lydia. "Nobody came for you." It wasn't a question. She answered it anyway. "No." He took his hat off, turned it in his hands once, put it back on. "My name's Wesley Carter," he said. "I've got a ranch about 4 miles east. I was delivering feed to the mill, was heading back." Lydia said nothing. She didn't know what she was supposed to say. Wesley looked down the empty road, then back at her. "I've got a spare room," he said. "And there's food. Nothing fancy, but it's warm." He paused. "I'm not asking anything from you. I'm just saying there's room." Lydia looked at him for a long time. She was good at reading men. She'd had to learn to be. And she looked at this one carefully, the set of his jaw, the way he held his hands, the fact that he'd stated his name first and wasn't moving toward her. He looked tired and a little uncomfortable and entirely sincere. She thought about 43 cents and the wind coming through her coat. She thought about Clara's hand in her collar. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. Wesley shook his head, a small, flat motion. "You're not a burden," he said. "You're a mother trying to survive." He helped carry the suitcase without being asked. He didn't reach for Clara. He seemed to understand somehow that taking the child from a stranger's arms was a different kind of intrusion. So Lydia kept her daughter and climbed up onto the wagon seat herself, and Wesley handed up the suitcase and then got up on the other side and released the brake. They rode in silence for a while. The road was rough and the cold was real, but the wagon had a canvas side that broke some of the wind, and it was better than the platform. Clara slept through all of it. "Were you supposed to be meeting Fenwick?" Wesley asked, after a mile or so. Lydia looked at him. "You know him?" "Everybody around here knows everybody," Wesley said. "Not proud of it. Just a fact." "He placed a notice," Lydia said carefully, "in a newspaper. He was looking for a wife. I answered it." Wesley was quiet. "He's gone," he said finally. "Left about 3 weeks ago. Heard he had debts. Headed south." A pause. I didn't know he'd sent for someone. Lydia absorbed this. 3 weeks ago, before she'd even bought the train ticket. Douglas Fenwick had written her a letter promising to meet her at the station, and 3 weeks before she arrived, he had already left. The telegram. I am a man of my word. She almost laughed. She pressed her lips together and looked at the dark road instead. You could have wired ahead, Wesley said. I know that, Lydia said. I should have. She paused. I suppose I thought that if I gave myself time to think about it, I'd talk myself out of going, and I couldn't afford to stay where I was. Wesley didn't ask why. She was grateful for that. They rode another half-mile before he spoke again. Well, he said, you're here now. What? The ranch came into view as a set of dark shapes against the slightly lighter dark of the sky. The farmhouse, the barn, the fence lines. A light burned in one window. Not much, but it was something. Wesley brought the wagon to a stop and helped Lydia down, and she followed him inside with Clara still against her shoulder, and the warmth of the house hit her like a wall. It wasn't a fancy house. It was a working house, the kind where everything had a purpose and nothing was decorative. A cast-iron stove in the corner, a rough table with 2 chairs, a shelf with a few cans and a bag of flour, a fireplace against the far wall with a low fire burning. The floor was swept but uneven, and one of the windows had a crack in it stuffed with a rag. But it was warm, and there was no wind. Wesley put a pot of beans on the stove. He didn't fuss over it or make a production of it, just put it on like it was what you did when you had people in the house who hadn't eaten. Lydia sat at the table with Clara in her lap, and after a few minutes, Clara woke up and looked around with wide, uncertain eyes. It's all right, Lydia told her quietly. We're inside. Clara looked at Wesley, who was standing at the stove with his back to them. Then she looked at the fireplace. Then she leaned her head back against Lydia's chest and seemed to decide that this was acceptable. They ate. Clara ate 3 spoonfuls of beans and then fell asleep again, and Wesley found a blanket and showed Lydia the spare room, small, with a narrow cot and a single window, and she laid her daughter down and stood in the doorway for a moment just watching her breathe. When she came back to the main room, Wesley was sitting at the table with a cup of something hot. He pushed a second cup toward the other chair. Lydia sat down. Thank you, she said. He nodded. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the wind moved through the eaves and found no way in. I'll figure out something in the morning, Lydia said. I don't intend to impose on you. I just need to... She stopped because she wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. She needed to figure out what came next. She needed a plan that didn't exist yet. There's no hurry, Wesley said. You don't know me. No. That doesn't concern you? He thought about it, actually seemed to think about it, which she hadn't expected. People in need aren't usually a threat, he said, and the ones that are... You get a sense. He looked at her levelly. I don't get that sense from you. Lydia looked at him. At the steadiness in his face, the absence of performance. He wasn't trying to seem trustworthy. He just was, or he wasn't, and he seemed to understand that she'd have to decide that for herself. I'm not fragile, she said. It came out a little sharp. I can see that, Wesley said. She didn't sleep well. That was the honest truth of it. The cot was better than the platform bench, and the room was warm, and Clara slept soundly beside her. But Lydia lay in the dark and went over the past 24 hours with the relentless attention of a woman who couldn't turn her mind off. She had come here for a life that didn't exist. She was in a stranger's house with 43 cents and a 2-year-old and a suitcase that had everything she owned in it. She was 4 miles from a town where she knew no one and had no prospects. She thought about the landlord's knock. She thought about the laundry in Cincinnati. She thought about her mother's hands, which had been red and cracked from other people's washing until the day she died. She thought, I am not going to let this be the end of it. It was not a feeling of confidence. It was more like stubbornness, the kind that lives deep in the bone and doesn't have anything to do with optimism. She had gotten here. She had kept Clara fed and warm and moving. She had done that on 43 cents and a telegram and sheer refusal. She would figure out what came next. In the morning, when Clara woke with the dawn and started pulling at Lydia's hair, Lydia got up before Wesley was awake and started the stove, found the coffee, found a pan. By the time Wesley came out of his room, there was coffee made and eggs on the stove. She'd found the hen house through the kitchen window and gone out quietly while Clara played with a wooden spoon on the floor. Wesley stopped in the doorway and looked at the eggs, looked at Clara, looked at Lydia. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "Sit down." He sat. They ate breakfast at the rough table while Clara pulled herself up on the chair legs and made observations in the serious, half-formed language of a 2-year-old. And something about the morning light coming through the cracked window and the smell of coffee and the sound of a child talking to herself made the room feel, briefly, like something other than what it was. Wesley watched Clara point at the fireplace and announce something urgent about it. "She talk a lot?" he asked. "Constantly," Lydia said. "I don't know where she gets it." Something almost like a smile crossed his face. Not quite, but almost. After breakfast, Lydia cleaned the kitchen. Not because she felt she owed it, but because her hands needed something to do while she thought. She wiped down the table and scrubbed the pan and found a torn curtain near the window and mended it while Clara napped, using a needle and thread from her suitcase. Wesley came back from the barn in the early afternoon and stopped when he saw the curtain. "You sew?" he said. "Enough," Lydia said. He looked around the kitchen at the things she'd cleaned and straightened. "You don't have to. I'm not doing it because I have to," Lydia said. She set down the curtain and looked at him. "I need to be useful. I can't just sit. It's not in me to sit." Wesley was quiet for a moment. "I understand that," he said. She believed him. He leaned against the doorframe. He'd been working since before she was up, she could see that. The dirt on his hands, the tiredness around his eyes that was different from the tiredness of not enough sleep. "There's more than I can manage," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "The ranch, since—" he stopped. "It's been a while since it was kept up properly." Lydia waited. "I'm not offering charity," he said. "I want to be clear about that. This would be a position, real work, cooking, cleaning, keeping the house. I pay in room and board, and a little besides." He looked at her. "Clara would be safe here. That much I can promise." Lydia looked at him for a long moment. The practical part of her mind was already calculating. Room and board was more than she could make in Millhaven without references or contacts. Clara would be safe. She would have time to figure out what came next. The other part of her, the part that had learned to be careful, was studying his face. I wasn't looking at her the way some men looked at women who had nowhere else to go. There was no satisfaction in his expression, no calculation. He looked like a man who had made a practical offer and was waiting to hear whether she'd accept it. "A home needs someone who cares about it," he said. "I think this place needs someone like you." Lydia thought about the platform, the empty road, the dark. "All right," she said. She didn't say it the way a woman says it when she's grateful. She said it the way a woman says it when she's agreed to terms. Wesley nodded once. Clara woke up from her nap then, calling from the back room, and Lydia went to get her, and by the time she came back to the kitchen with her daughter on her hip, the light had shifted and the afternoon was already moving toward evening, and somewhere outside a horse was moving in the field, and the curtain she'd mended was hanging straight in the window. It wasn't what she'd come here for. It wasn't what she'd planned. It wasn't safe in the way that certainty is safe. But it was something. And for the first time since the train pulled away from that platform, Lydia Hartwell allowed herself to believe that something might be enough to build on. The first week was awkward in the way that sharing space with a stranger always is. Not hostile, just full of small negotiations that nobody named out loud. Wesley was up before dawn every morning. Lydia could hear him through the thin wall between her room and the main house. The scrape of boots on the floor, the metallic click of the stove door, the sound of water poured into the coffee pot. He moved quietly, like a man who had spent years being careful not to disturb anyone and had kept doing it even after there was no one left to disturb. That detail settled somewhere in Lydia's chest and stayed there. She started getting up earlier, not because he'd asked her to, but because lying in the dark listening to someone else start the day felt wrong to her in some deep practical way. She had accepted a position. That meant something. By the fourth morning, she was already at the stove when he came out, and he stopped in the doorway with a look of brief, genuine surprise that he smoothed over quickly. "You don't have to beat me to it," he said. "I know," Lydia said. "Coffee's ready." He sat down. Clara was still asleep, which gave them 20 minutes of quiet, the kind of quiet that can be comfortable or unbearable depending on the people sharing it. With Wesley, Lydia was surprised to find it was mostly comfortable. He didn't feel silence to prove he was sociable. He drank his coffee and looked at what needed doing that day. And she ate and thought about her own list, and neither of them performed at each other. It was, she realized, the first time in years she'd sat with someone in the morning without bracing for something. The ranch was larger than it had looked in the dark. In daylight, coming outside after breakfast to hang washing on the line, Lydia could see the full extent of it, the main pasture running south toward a creek she could hear but couldn't see, the fenced paddock where Wesley kept 3 working horses, the barn with its sagging east wall, the chicken yard, and beyond all of that, the land just continuing, brown and gray and enormous, with the mountains sitting on the horizon like something that had always been there and always would be. She'd grown up in cities. Not big ones, Cincinnati wasn't New York, but places where the view from any window was another building, another wall, another limit to how far you could see. This was different. This much open space made her feel, in turn, free and then exposed, sometimes within minutes of each other. Clara had no such ambivalence. She took one look at the pasture on their 3rd morning there and declared her intentions by walking directly toward it on her unsteady 2-year-old legs. "Clara, stop!" Lydia caught her by the back of her coat. Clara looked at the field, looked at her mother, made her feelings clear. "You can't just walk into a field," Lydia told her. "There's horses in there." "Hoss," Clara said, with the gravity of someone reporting important news. "Yes. Horses. Big ones. That can step on you." Clara seemed to consider this. "Hoss," she repeated with exactly the same tone, which meant she had heard the information and filed it somewhere irrelevant. Wesley was coming out of the barn and had caught the end of this exchange. He stopped at the fence and looked at Clara. "She can come look at them," he said, "long as she doesn't go in the gate." Lydia hesitated. "They're gentle," Wesley said. "Working horses, not green ones. They've been around kids." He said it matter-of-factly, not as reassurance exactly, just as information. She found she trusted matter-of-fact more than reassurance. She lifted Clara and carried her to the fence, and Wesley's big dark bay lowered its head and blew warm air at the child's face, and Clara went completely still with a kind of wonder that Lydia hadn't seen in her daughter's expression before, pure, uncomplicated astonishment at the world. "Hoss," Clara whispered. "His name's Calhoun," Wesley said. Clara looked at him. "Cal?" she announced. Something moved in Wesley's expression. Not a smile exactly, but something had shifted and then been put back deliberately, like a door opened and quietly closed. "Cal," he agreed. By the end of the 2nd week, Lydia had learned the shape of Wesley's silences. There was the working silence, focused and specific, the kind he wore when he was repairing something or calculating what the day needed. There was the tired silence, which came in the evenings after he'd been out all day and sat heavy on him like weather. And there was the other kind. The silence that arrived without warning when something small happened. Clara laughing at the chickens, or the sound of rain starting, or a particular angle of afternoon light through the window. And Wesley would stop what he was doing and go somewhere else for a moment before coming back. She didn't ask about it. She had her own silences she didn't want asked about. What she did instead was simply keep her hands busy and let him have whatever he needed. She fixed the curtain in the kitchen. She reorganized the pantry shelf, which had been a catastrophe of mismatched cans and unlabeled jars, into something that made sense. She found a loose board on the porch steps and hammered it back down with a nail from the tool shelf in the barn. And when Wesley came in at noon and stepped on it and it held, he looked at the step and then at her and said nothing, but she saw him press on it twice more before going inside, testing it. She was starting to understand that this was how he expressed things. Through testing, through noticing, through the fact that when she'd fixed the curtain, he'd adjusted it slightly so it hung even at the bottom. And that small adjustment was somehow his way of participating. Men like Wesley didn't say much, but they weren't empty. The things they didn't say just lived somewhere else in them. She thought about that more than she should have. The trouble started on a Thursday, 11 days after she'd arrived. She'd gone into Millhaven with Wesley. He needed hardware from the supply store, and she needed to send a letter to the one woman in Cincinnati who might wonder what had happened to her, a neighbor named Mrs. Paulson, who had minded Clara a few times when Lydia had picked up extra shifts. Lydia had no obligation to write, but she did it anyway, because she was the kind of person who felt the weight of someone else's worry even at a distance. The town was small, a main street with maybe 12 buildings on it, a church at one end and a grain elevator at the other. The post office was inside the general store, which was run by a man named Alderman, the same family as the hotel, she gathered, whose wife was behind the counter and whose eyes tracked Lydia from the moment she walked in with a kind of slow, deliberate attention that had nothing to do with hospitality. Lydia bought a stamp and wrote the letter at the small stand near the window and sealed it and handed it over. "You're staying out at the Carter place," the woman said. Not a question. "That's right," Lydia said. "And you came to meet Douglas Fenwick." Lydia looked at her. "Yes." "Word travels," Mrs. Alderman said, which was apparently meant to be an explanation. "Apparently," Lydia said. The woman looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Wesley Carter is a decent man," she said, in a tone that sounded generous on the surface but had something warning about it underneath. "He's been through enough." Lydia held the woman's gaze. "I'm sure he has," she said evenly. She bought the flowers she'd wanted and left. Wesley was outside with the wagon, loading the hardware. He looked at her face when she came out. "Trouble?" he said. "No," Lydia said. "Just getting my bearings." He looked at her a moment longer, then handed her up onto the wagon. They were a quarter-mile out of town before she said, "Does everyone here know your business?" "Yes," Wesley said. "It's a small town." "And mine, apparently." He glanced at her. "It bothers you." "Doesn't it bother you?" He thought about it. "Used to," he said. "I stopped fighting it. People talk. You can either let it drive you back inside, or you can just go on." "What made you stop fighting it?" He was quiet for a moment. The wagon rolled over a frozen rut and lurched. "There wasn't much left to protect," he said. "When there's nothing left that can be hurt by gossip, you stop caring about gossip." Lydia heard the thing underneath that, the shape of a loss she didn't know the details of, and she left it alone. But she thought about it for the rest of the ride home. She found out the details not from Wesley, but from a woman named Pearl Caswell, who arrived at the ranch on a Saturday morning with a jar of preserved plums and the open, friendly manner of someone who didn't bother pretending she wasn't curious. Pearl was in her mid-40s, solid and talkative, married to a farmer whose land bordered Wesley's on the north side. She'd known Wesley for 15 years, she said, settling herself at Lydia's kitchen table with the ease of someone who'd sat there before, and she started talking while Lydia made coffee and kept one eye on Clara in the main room, and the whole while Wesley was conveniently outside and likely staying there on purpose. His wife had died, Pearl said. 4 years ago. Her name was Marin. She'd come down with a fever in February and was gone by March, and she'd been carrying a child at the time, 5 months along. They lost both of them. Lydia stood at the stove and listened and kept her face still. "He doesn't talk about it," Pearl said. "He's not the talking kind, but you can see it in him if you know where to look." She accepted the coffee Lydia set in front of her. "He was a different man before, still quiet. But the quiet was lighter, I suppose. Now it's got weight to it." "That makes sense," Lydia said. Pearl looked at her with straightforward curiosity. "How are you finding it, out here? It's not what you were expecting, I imagine." "No," Lydia said. "It isn't. But you're still here." "I'm still here." Pearl nodded, like this answered something. She stayed another hour, and when she left, she squeezed Lydia's hand at the door and told her she was welcome at their place any time, and Lydia thanked her and meant it. That evening, she watched Wesley eating supper without looking up from his plate, and she thought about Marin, who had died in February with a child she never got to meet. And she thought about Wesley carrying that through 4 years of Montana winters alone in this house. And she didn't say anything about it. She just made sure there was something warm on the table. Clara got sick at the start of the 3rd week. Nothing serious. A winter cold that children get, the kind that involves a great deal of runny nose and crying at 2 in the morning and general misery all around. But it kept Lydia inside, which meant the outside work piled up. And on the 2nd day of it, she came out of the bedroom after getting Clara back to sleep at noon and found Wesley already at the stove, making soup. She stopped in the doorway. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know how to make soup," Wesley said. "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." He didn't turn around. He was cutting something, an onion from the sound of it. "You've been up since before 4. Go sit down." Lydia almost argued. She was built for arguing and for not needing help, and for making sure everyone around her could see that she was managing fine, thank you very much. These were habits she'd developed over years of managing alone, and they sat deep. But she was so tired. She sat down at the table. Wesley put a bowl of soup in front of her 15 minutes later, and then took a second bowl down the hall to Clara, and Lydia could hear him in there, his low, unhurried voice, not making a fuss, just talking to the child the way you talk to someone who doesn't feel well, quiet and steady. She couldn't hear the words, just the tone. Clara stopped crying. Lydia ate her soup and didn't look up from the bowl. Well, when she finally did ask, because she was a person who couldn't leave things entirely alone, even when she knew she should, it came out sideways, the way things do when you've been sitting on them too long. She was mending one of Wesley's work shirts a Thursday evening, and he was at the table going over some papers, accounts of some kind, numbers she didn't ask about, and it had been quiet for a while in the comfortable way. And then she said, "Pearl Caswell came by last Saturday." Wesley didn't look up. "I know. She told me about Marin." A pause, very brief. Then he turned one of the papers over. "Pearl talks." "She does," Lydia agreed. "She meant well by it, I think." "She always means well." He set down his pencil. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the table, not at her. "What did she tell you?" "That your wife died, that you lost the baby too." He nodded once, slowly. "I'm sorry," Lydia said. She said it plainly, without embellishment, because she had found over years that plain sorrow was more useful than dressed-up sympathy. "It was 4 years ago," Wesley said. "That doesn't make it smaller." He looked at her then. It was the first time she'd felt, in the weeks she'd been there, that he was really looking at her. Not at the situation or the arrangement or the practical fact of her presence, but at her specifically. "No," he said, "it doesn't." They sat there a moment. "I had a husband," Lydia said. She hadn't planned to say it, but it seemed like the room required it, like they'd opened something and it should go both ways. "Clara's father. We weren't married long. He left when she was 6 months old." Wesley said nothing, but he was still looking at her. "He wasn't a bad man," Lydia said. "He just wasn't ready for any of it. For me, for her, for the weight of it. One morning he was there, and by that evening he wasn't." She turned the shirt in her hands. "I spent about 2 weeks being angry, and then I had to stop because being angry didn't keep us fed." "What did you do?" "What women do," Lydia said. "I worked. I kept going. I found a way." Wesley picked up his pencil but didn't write anything. "You're good at that," he said finally. "At what?" "Finding a way." Lydia looked at the shirt, at the mend she was making, which was not elegant but would hold. "I don't know if it's a skill or just stubbornness," she said. "Doesn't matter which," Wesley said. "It amounts to the same thing." There was a man who came to the ranch in the 4th week, and he was the first real trouble. His name was Garrett Holt, and he came on a Wednesday morning when Wesley was out in the north field mending fence. Lydia was in the yard hanging laundry. Clara was sitting in a wooden crate nearby, which was her preferred location when Lydia was outside, because from it she could see everything and deliver her ongoing commentary on the world. And she heard a horse coming up the road and turned to look. The rider was somewhere between 40 and 50, heavy-set, with a thick dark mustache and the kind of clothes that were slightly better than the land required, which meant he was trying to make a point about himself. He rode like someone who expected to be looked at. He pulled up at the edge of the yard. "Morning," he said, looking at Lydia with the specific kind of smile that men deploy when they've already decided a woman is below them and want her to know it while seeming friendly. "This the Carter place?" "It is," Lydia said. She didn't move toward him, didn't stop what she was doing, just turned enough to face him. "Wesley's out in the north field." "I know where Wesley is," the man said. "Saw him when I rode in." He dismounted without being invited to, tied the horse to the fence post, and came a few steps into the yard. "I'm Garrett Holt. I own the Holt spread about 10 miles east." "All right," Lydia said. "And you're the woman he's got working here?" Not a question. "I work here, yes." Holt looked around the yard, at the laundry she was hanging, at the repaired porch step, at Clara in her crate. "Fenwick's woman," he said. A little smile. Something tightened in Lydia's chest, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm nobody's woman, Mr. Holt. I came to meet Douglas Fenwick, who was already gone. I'm here now. Holt rocked back slightly on his heels. Wesley taken on charity cases now? Lydia set down the shirt she was holding and looked at him directly. I work for my room and board, she said. Same as any hired hand. If that's what you came to discuss, you can have the conversation with Wesley. He'll be back in an hour. Holt's smile didn't change. If anything, it got slightly fixed, the way smiles do when they're covering something less pleasant. I'll wait, he said. He helped himself to the porch steps and sat down, which meant he was sitting on the step she'd fixed, and she was not going to mention that, but she noted it. He didn't say anything else to her. He just sat there with the comfortable ownership of someone who believed that any space he chose to occupy was his by right of having chosen it. Lydia finished hanging the laundry. She went inside and told herself it was nothing, that men like Holt existed everywhere and were best handled by giving them nothing to respond to. She put the kettle on, not because she intended to offer him anything, but because her hands needed something. Clara came in from the yard with a handful of dirt and a serious expression. Man, Clara told her. Yes, Lydia agreed. I know. No like, Clara said. Lydia looked at her daughter, 2 years old, 7 words, entirely correct. Neither do I, she said. Wesley came back 40 minutes later, and Lydia watched from the kitchen window as the 2 men talked on the porch. She couldn't hear the words. She could read the body language. Holt talking too much, gesturing toward the east, toward the land. Wesley standing with his arms at his sides, not crossing them, not leaning back. Very still in the particular way he went still when he was controlling something. After 10 minutes, Holt mounted his horse and left without looking back at the house. Wesley came inside. He poured himself water from the pitcher and drank it, and Lydia waited. What did he want? She said. My east field, Wesley said. Does he want it often? He comes by twice a year, Wesley said. Offers me a price that's insulting and waits to see if things have gotten bad enough that I'll take it. He set the cup down. They haven't. But they're not things aren't easy. She said it carefully. She was aware she'd seen the account papers on his table. Things are tight, Wesley said. They're not desperate. He looked at her. He said something to you. He was rude, Lydia said. Nothing I couldn't handle. I know you could handle it. He said it without qualification, no softening hedge on it, just a statement of what he'd already established. I'm asking what he said. He called me a charity case. Wesley's jaw tightened, just slightly. Then he looked at the table. He's wrong, he said. I know he is. A beat of quiet. He'll say worse, Wesley said. Next time he comes. And the time after that. He's the kind of man who uses whatever he can find. I grew up around men like Holt, Lydia said. Different names, same game. They count on you being embarrassed. The minute you're not, they've got nothing. Wesley looked at her for a moment. You don't embarrass easy, he said. I used to, Lydia said. I got over it. March came in with cold that had teeth, and then in the second week it broke all at once and the air changed overnight from something you wore against to something you moved through differently, and the horses grew restless, and the first geese came over heading north, and Clara stood in the yard with her face turned up watching them with her mouth open. With March came something Lydia hadn't expected, Millhaven beginning to shift its opinion of her. It was slow, and she was aware of how it worked. She'd been watched, and the watching had revealed nothing alarming, and small-town caution was converting itself into the first stages of something warmer. Mrs. Alderman at the general store started calling her by name instead of looking at her with that guarded, sideways attention. Pearl Caswell brought her family by one Sunday afternoon, and her husband, a quiet, thick-armed man named John, shook Lydia's hand and told her they were glad the ranch had someone looking after it. 2 of the women from down the valley came by together and accepted coffee and stayed an hour and were easy and open in the way that women are with each other when they've decided someone is all right. Lydia was careful not to lean into it too fast. She'd been welcomed places before that had turned cold later when something shifted. But she let it happen at its own pace, and she was honest with people when they asked her questions, and she didn't perform either more confidence or more vulnerability than she actually had. She told Pearl one afternoon, while they were outside watching their children. Pearl had a 5-year-old who was showing Clara how to chase chickens with elaborate seriousness. that she'd been surprised to find she liked Montana. "I thought I'd feel like I was at the end of the world," Lydia said. "You are at the end of the world," Pearl said cheerfully. "That's rather the point." "I thought I'd hate that." "Do you?" Lydia looked at the mountains, which were still snow-covered at the peaks, sharp and white against a sky that was doing something complicated with light she still didn't have words for. "No," she said. "I don't." It was a Tuesday evening in March when Wesley came in from the barn at a different hour than usual, later, just at the edge of dark, and he was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. It had an edge to it. He washed his hands and sat down at the table while she put the food out, and he looked at his plate instead of at her. "Holt's been talking," he said. Lydia sat down. "About what?" "About the arrangement here. About you." He picked up his fork and set it down again. "He's saying it's not that the setup isn't respectable, that you're not here as a housekeeper." Lydia absorbed this. "He's suggesting something improper," she said. "Yes." "And people are listening?" Wesley looked up at her. "Some are, some aren't. It's the kind of thing that spreads whether anyone believes it or not." Lydia thought about Cincinnati, about the landlord who'd started knocking in the evenings, about the way reputation worked for women, how it wasn't really about what you did, it was about what people decided about you, and once they'd decided, the facts were mostly irrelevant. "What do you want to do about it?" she asked. Wesley was quiet for a moment. He looked at his plate again. "I'm not going to let him run you off," he said. "If that's what you're asking." "That's not quite what I asked." He exhaled slowly. He pushed the fork to the side of the plate. "I don't know," he said. It cost him something to say it, she could tell. He was not a man comfortable with not knowing. "I think, if you're willing to stay, and I think you are, then we just go on. Do the work. Let people see what this actually is." "And what is this actually?" Lydia asked. Carefully, not accusingly, just cleanly. Wesley looked at her. "A woman who works hard and a man who needed the help," he said. "That's it. That's all it has to be." Lydia held his gaze. "All right," she said. She picked up her fork and he picked up his, and they ate supper, and Clara knocked a piece of bread onto the floor and picked it up and ate it anyway. And outside the wind moved through the new grass, and the kitchen was warm, and neither of them said anything else about Garrett Holt that evening. But Lydia thought, while she was washing the dishes in the quiet after Clara went to bed and Wesley was somewhere outside checking the barn one last time, that a woman who works hard and a man who needed the help was the most honest description of something she'd heard in a long time. And she thought, scrubbing the pan, that honest was a thing she hadn't had enough of in her life. Not from men, not from circumstances, not from the world in general. The pan came clean. She dried it and hung it back on its hook. Outside, she heard Wesley's boots on the porch steps, the steps she'd fixed that still held, and then the door opening, and then the sound of him hanging up his coat. "Going to be cold again tonight," he said. "I'll bank the stove," she said. "I already did." She turned around. He was standing there looking at her with the careful, level expression she was starting to know, the one that meant something was there that he wasn't certain he should say. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. Then, as if this needed clarification, "On the ranch. I mean, you could have gone. After Holt. Some women would have." "I'm not some women," Lydia said. "No," Wesley said. "You're not." He went down the hall to his room. She stood at the sink for another moment, not doing anything in particular, just standing there in the warm kitchen while the stove banked and the wind moved outside, and she let herself feel, very briefly, the particular and unfamiliar sensation of being somewhere she hadn't been talked out of yet. Clara made a sound in her sleep in the back room. Just a small shift of breath. A child, completely at rest. Lydia dried her hands and went to check on her, and she was fine, curled on her side, one hand open beside her face. And Lydia pulled the blanket up an inch and stood there in the dark for a moment before going to her own bed. She fell asleep faster than she had in weeks. Spring came to the valley, the way it always does on the frontier. Not gently, not all at once, but in a series of arguments with winter that winter kept almost winning. One morning the air would smell like thaw and new mud and something green underneath everything, And then by afternoon, the temperature would drop 20 degrees and the sky would go the color of iron, and everyone who'd been fooled before would remember that March was not to be trusted. Lydia had been at the Carter Ranch for 2 months by the time April arrived with something like conviction. And in those 2 months, she had learned the particular rhythms of the place the way you learn a piece of music. Not by studying it, but by hearing it often enough that it lives in you without effort. She knew which board in the hallway creaked at 2 in the morning when Wesley got up to check the horses because something had startled them. She knew that Calhoun, the dark bay, would press his nose against the fence if you came out before 6 because he expected a handful of oats and considered it a contractual arrangement. She knew that Wesley ate everything she put in front of him without comment, but left the last spoonful in the bowl every time, without exception, and she had no idea why and had decided not to ask. She knew that Clara had become, in the specific vocabulary of a not-quite 3-year-old, attached to Wesley Carter in a way that had no strategy behind it, and no awareness of its own significance. Children attached to things honestly, without calculation. To the dog that came around once a week looking for scraps. To the particular blue cup she'd decided was hers. To the man who had started, sometime in late February, lifting her up to see the horses over the fence rail because she was not quite tall enough on her own. Wesley had not made a production of this. He'd just done it. And Clara, who forgot nothing, had started going to find him in the mornings to report whatever had occurred to her overnight, which was usually something about Cal or the chickens or a dream she'd had, conveyed in a mixture of words and gestures and absolute confidence that he would understand and care. Lydia watched this from the kitchen window more than she admitted to herself. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. She almost missed it. She'd gone into Millhaven with Pearl Caswell, who had a wagon and an errand at the dry goods store, and had offered the company because Pearl was someone who preferred company as a general principle. Lydia had stopped at the post office window mostly out of habit, not expecting anything, because no one knew she was here except Mrs. Paulson back in Cincinnati, who had written once already with a brief and warm letter saying she was glad Lydia was safe and that she was praying for her, which Lydia had read twice and kept folded in her coat pocket. But this letter was not from Mrs. Paulson. The handwriting on the envelope was one she recognized with a jolt that went through her chest like cold water. She stood at the post office window and looked at it for a moment without taking it. "Ma'am?" the clerk said. She took it. She didn't open it in the store. She found a bench outside on the boardwalk and sat down with the letter in her hands while Pearl was inside, and she looked at the name on the return address, R. Hartwell. Cincinnati, O.H. Robert Hartwell. Her husband. Clara's father. The man who had walked out of their apartment on a Tuesday evening 4 years ago with his coat and his hat and a bag. She hadn't known he'd packed and had not come back. She opened it. It was 3 paragraphs. She read them twice, slowly, and then she folded the letter and put it back in the envelope and sat on the bench and looked at the street. The horses tied at the rail, a boy pushing a cart, the gray sky pressing down on the mountains, and made herself breathe evenly. He'd found her through Mrs. Paulson. I was in Cincinnati still. He wanted, he said, to make things right. He'd been thinking. He understood he'd done wrong. He missed Clara. He was a different man now, he said, and he wanted to know if there was any chance. Pearl came out of the store with a package under her arm and stopped when she saw Lydia's face. What happened? Nothing, Lydia said. Just a letter. Pearl looked at her. It's from my husband, Lydia said. Pearl sat down beside her without being asked. I thought there wasn't a husband, she said carefully. There is, Lydia said. Technically. We never, it just stopped. He left and I went on and I never formally, she stopped. We're still married. Pearl was quiet for a moment. What does he want? To try again, apparently. Another silence. What do you want? Pearl asked. Lydia looked at the mountains. I don't know yet, she said. Want. She didn't tell Wesley that night. She told herself it was because there was nothing to tell yet. She hadn't decided anything, hadn't responded. The letter was just a letter. But she was honest enough with herself, lying awake later in the dark, to admit that the real reason was more complicated. The Carter Ranch had become something she didn't have a word for. Not home, exactly. That felt like too much, like claiming something she hadn't been given. But something adjacent to home, something she had built herself into without quite noticing, and the letter from Robert made her feel the fragility of that, the way you only feel how warm a room is when someone opens the outside door. She read the letter again the next morning while Clara was still asleep, sitting at the kitchen table in the early light before Wesley was up. 3 paragraphs. She was a different man now. He missed Clara. She thought about Clara, 2 years old, asleep in the back room. Clara didn't know her father. She'd been 6 months old when he left, and she had no memory of him and had never asked about him because she'd never known there was someone to ask about. She thought about what it meant for a child to have a father. She thought about what it meant for that father to be Robert, specifically, who had packed a bag on a Tuesday without saying a word and walked out on a 6-month-old and a wife who'd been up every night for a week with the baby and working 12-hour shifts to cover the rent he hadn't paid. She folded the letter and put it back in her coat. The morning she'd decided to say nothing to Wesley became the afternoon he could see something was wrong. He was not demonstrative, he did not press. But he noticed things. She'd come to understand that about him, the way his attention worked, quiet and thorough. And he noticed that she was elsewhere in a way she hadn't been before, even in the early uncertain days of February. He didn't say anything at dinner. But afterward, when she was at the sink and Clara was in the main room talking to a wooden horse Wesley had carved for her sometime in March, he came and stood nearby with the particular stillness that meant he was deciding whether to speak. "You don't have to tell me," he said, "but something's off." Lydia dried a cup. "I got a letter," she said, "from my husband." She heard him go very quiet behind her. "He wants to come back," she said, "or for me to come back. He wasn't entirely specific." She set the cup down. "He says he's different." "They say that," Wesley said. She turned around. His expression was controlled, but not entirely. There was something in it she hadn't seen before, a tension around the jaw, a stillness in his eyes that was working at something. "He left you," Wesley said, "with an infant." "Yes. And now he's found you." "He found me through someone I trusted," Lydia said. "I wrote to Mrs. Paulson when we arrived. I should have thought about that." "This isn't your fault." "I know it isn't my fault. I'm just saying I didn't think—" She stopped. "He wants to see Clara." Wesley looked at the door to the main room, where Clara's voice was audible, narrating something about the wooden horse with focused intensity. He looked back at Lydia. "What do you want?" he said. "Everyone keeps asking me that," she said, a little sharply. "Because the answer matters," Wesley said. "Just that. No apology for the directness." Lydia looked at the dish she was holding. A plain blue plate, chipped at the rim, 1 of 6. "I don't want to upend Clara's life for a man who might leave again," she said. "I don't want to go back to Cincinnati. I don't—" She put the plate down. "I don't want to leave." The last sentence was quieter than she intended, more honest. Wesley said nothing. But something shifted in the room, not dramatically, not the way things shift in stories, but the way they shift in real life, which is more like a slight change in temperature than anything you could name. "Then don't," he said. "It's not that simple," Lydia said. "He's her father, and we're still legally—" "I know," Wesley said. "I know it's not simple." "He'll come here," she said. "If I don't respond, he'll come here. Men like Robert don't stop when they've made up their minds. Not because they love you, because they don't like being left." Wesley looked at her steadily. "Let him come," he said. "This is your home." The word landed on her like something physical. She looked at him. "You called it my home," she said. "That's what it is," Wesley said. "What?" Garrett Holt came back before Robert Hartwell did. He came on a Thursday morning, which was apparently his preferred day for arriving uninvited, and this time he did not bother with the pretense of wanting to buy land. He came straight to the point, which Lydia would have almost respected if the point hadn't been what it was. Wesley was in the barn. Lydia was in the yard with Clara when Holt rode up, and this time he brought someone with him. A man she didn't know, younger, with a narrow face and the watchful eyes of someone hired to listen and remember. "Morning," Holt said, in the same pleasant surface tone he always used. "Mrs.—" He paused with theatrical uncertainty. "What do we call you exactly? Hartwell? Fenwick? Carter?" "Hartwell," Lydia said. "Same as always." "Of course." He dismounted. The other man stayed on his horse. "I'll be brief. I've been talking to some people in town about the situation here." "I imagine you have," Lydia said. People have concerns, Holt said, about propriety, about a woman and a man, unmarried, living on the same property, about, he looked at Clara, the child. Clara has nothing to do with anything, Lydia said, and there was something in her voice that she didn't bother moderating. Well, now that depends, Holt said. He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. I've had some correspondence with the county sheriff. There are questions about the legality of your arrangement here, whether it constitutes what exactly? Wesley's voice came from behind Lydia. She hadn't heard him come out of the barn. He was standing at the edge of the yard, still in his work gloves, looking at Holt with the particular quality of attention he had when he was genuinely angry and containing it completely. Holt straightened. Wesley, I'm trying to handle this quietly. You're not trying to handle anything quietly, Wesley said. He walked forward. Not fast, not aggressive. Just the steady movement of a man who knows where he's going. You're trying to hand a woman a threat and see if she runs. That's what you always do. He stopped a few feet from Holt. The East Field is not for sale. Not this week, not next. You want to send the sheriff? Send him. There's nothing here to find. Holt held his gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Lydia. You're in a difficult position, he said to her. A woman alone. A child. No legal standing here. If your arrangement with Carter were questioned, you'd have nothing. She has standing, Wesley said. She works here. She has a room and a wage, and she's been nothing but respectable. And if you imply otherwise again in this yard or in town, I will make sure every man in this county knows exactly what you're doing and why. The silence stretched. Holt folded the paper and put it back in his coat. He looked at his companion, then at Wesley, then at Lydia, and the calculation in his face was visible for just a second before the pleasant surface came back. Just a neighborly visit, he said. Right out, Wesley said. Holt rode out. Lydia didn't say anything for a moment after they left. She stood in the yard with the dust settling and Clara pressed against her leg, because children could feel the charge in the air even when they didn't understand the words. He's not going to stop, she said. No, Wesley said. What does he actually want? The land, or is it personal? Wesley pulled off one of his work gloves. He looked at the road where Holt had gone. Both, he said. He wanted to buy this land 3 years ago, after Marin died, when he thought I'd sell to get out from under it. I didn't. He's been angry about it since, in the way men like him get angry. Not hot, just constant. He paused. And having you here, having the ranch showing signs of life again, that bothers him too. He wanted to see this place fail. And you not failing is a personal insult to him, Lydia said. Something like that. Clara pulled at Lydia's hand and pointed at the road Holt had taken. Bad man gone, she announced. Yes, Lydia said. Bad man gone. Wesley looked at Clara, and again there was that almost expression on his face, the one that came and went quickly. She's going to be something when she grows up, he said. She's already something, Lydia said. The storm that changed things didn't announce itself the way storms do in stories, with a dramatic darkening of the sky, and everyone looking up and reading the signs. It came in the way real storms come on the frontier, fast, much faster than anyone expected, riding a wind out of the northwest that hadn't been there an hour before. It was a Friday evening in late April. The temperature had been warm enough that day that Lydia had hung washing outside and not brought it in by supper, and Wesley had left the north paddock gate unlatched because he'd meant to go back out before dark to move the 2 younger horses to the barn. The wind arrived at dusk. Lydia was in the kitchen when she heard it change, heard the quality of it shift from ordinary to something else, something insistent, the kind that meant business. She went to the window. The washing on the line was horizontal, snapping violently. The sky to the northwest was the wrong color, a particular shade of green-gray that she didn't know from experience but understood instinctively to be a warning. She heard something bang loudly from the direction of the barn. Wesley came in from the hallway pulling on his coat. Stay inside with Clara, he said, moving to the door. The washing, Lydia said. Leave it. The north paddock gate. I know. He was already going out. She stood at the window and watched him cross the yard into the wind, which was now strong enough to push against him, and she watched him go for about 30 seconds before she made a decision. She went to the back room where Clara was sitting with the wooden horse. Clara, I need you to sit right here and not move. Then you do that? Clara looked at her with the serious expression she produced when she understood that something real was being asked. "Sit here," Clara confirmed. "Do not move from this room. I'll be back." She pulled on her coat and went outside. The wind hit her like a shove. It was not the cold of winter, but it had weight. It pushed against her side and she had to lean into it, and it kept pushing back. And the washing on the line was already half torn down, one of Wesley's shirts wrapped around the fence post like a flag. She grabbed it, and the other things that were still catchable, and bundled them under her arm, and got them inside, and then went back out because the wind was getting worse, and she could hear the horses now. Not calm horse sounds. Frightened ones. The north paddock gate was open. She could see the two younger horses moving against the far fence, pressed together, whites of their eyes visible, ears flat. The wind had found something loose on the barn roof and was working at it rhythmically, a deep metallic bang every few seconds. In the main barn she could hear Calhoun stamping. Wesley was at the barn door, fighting to get it open against the wind that was trying to hold it shut. She ran to the paddock. She'd been around horses for 2 months now, enough to know their moods and enough to know that frightened horses could hurt you without meaning to. She moved along the fence toward them, talking as she went. Not words exactly, just sound, the low continuous murmur that Wesley used with them, the tone that meant, "I'm here, and I'm not a threat." The younger one, the gray mare they called Frances, turned her head and rolled her eye, but didn't bolt. "Come on," Lydia said. "Come on, Frances, come here." She got her hand on the mare's neck. The horse was trembling. She could feel it through her palm, the fine, rapid shiver of an animal that was holding itself together by a narrow margin. She kept talking, kept her hand steady, moved toward the gate. Frances came. The other one, a younger gelding, followed because horses follow each other, and Lydia got them both through the paddock gate and across the yard to the barn just as Wesley got the main door open and the wind slapped it back against the wall. He turned and saw her with the 2 horses. He didn't say anything. He took Frances's rope from her and got the horses inside, and Lydia pulled the barn door shut behind them with both hands, leaning into it against the wind until the latch caught. Inside, the barn was loud, the roof working in the wind, the horses moving, the creak of the timbers, but it was contained. The 4 horses were together in the space, and they were calming already, doing what horses do, drawing steadiness from each other. Wesley was checking the stalls. Lydia found the loose piece of roofing he'd been dealing with before, a section of the east wall, where the wood had been weakened since winter and was lifting in the wind. She found a length of rope on the wall and tied it across the section, looping it through the gaps in the boards, pulling it tight. It wasn't a permanent fix, but it would hold tonight. Wesley came around the partition and saw what she'd done. He looked at the rope, at the section of wall, at her. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he said. "I didn't," Lydia said. "I just looked at what was moving and figured out what would stop it." He looked at her for a moment in the low lantern light of the barn, with the wind howling outside and the horses settling behind him, and something in his expression that she couldn't entirely read moved across his face and was gone. "Clara's inside?" he said. "I told her not to move. She'll still be there." "How do you know?" "Because she's Clara," Lydia said. "When she decides to do something, she does it." They worked in the barn for another hour, checking the other walls, reinforcing a gate that had been loose, putting down extra bedding because the temperature was dropping fast. The wind outside didn't diminish. If anything, it grew, and at some point rain arrived behind it, hard horizontal rain that found every gap in the barn walls and made everything smell like wet wood and earth. They worked without talking much. There wasn't much to say. The work was apparent, the needs were clear, and they'd both learned by now how to move around each other in a shared space without collision. She'd hand him something before he reached for it. He'd steady the thing she was lifting. It wasn't coordination that had been practiced exactly. It was more like a shared sense of what the situation required. When they finally came back to the house, they were both soaked. Clara was exactly where Lydia had left her, sitting in the middle of the back room floor, wooden horse in her lap, looking at the door with the focused patience of a child who has been told to wait and has decided that waiting is currently her most important job. "Mama," she said when Lydia came in the tone of someone for whom relief is indistinguishable from accusation. "I'm here," Lydia said. "I'm here, sweetheart. You did so well." She carried Clara to the kitchen, where Wesley had the stove going and had changed into dry clothes, and she got Clara settled with a warm cup of milk and stood dripping on the kitchen floor and felt the accumulated weight of the evening suddenly. She sat down. Wesley set a cup in front of her, coffee, hot, and sat down across the table, and they didn't speak for several minutes. Outside, the storm worked against the house and found nothing it could move. The stove ticked. Clara drank her milk with both hands on the cup, examining it with the seriousness of a scientist. The east wall of the barn's been going since winter, Wesley said. I kept putting it off. It held tonight, Lydia said. Your rope held it. For now. Tomorrow I'll fix it properly. He wrapped his hands around his own cup. The horses could have gone into the next county if you hadn't gotten them in. They were scared, Lydia said. They just needed someone to tell them where to go. Wesley looked at her. That's not nothing, he said. Going out in that. Getting two spooked horses into a barn. Not everyone would do that. You needed help, Lydia said simply. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not used to that, he said. Having someone. Lydia looked at her coffee. Neither am I, she said. Clara set down her cup with a small, precise thump. All done, she announced. Yes, Wesley said. All done. Sick. The storm blew through by morning, leaving behind the particular clarity that comes after weather, a washed sky, every edge sharp, the mountains showing their snow line with unusual precision. The barn had held. The rope had held. The east wall would need real work, but it was standing. Wesley was out before dawn to check the animals, as always. Lydia started the stove and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking at the clean morning, and she was thinking about the letter from Robert still folded in her coat pocket, and she was thinking about what Wesley had said, "This is your home." And she was trying to understand what it meant that both of those things were true at once, that Robert existed and his letter existed, and also that this house and this ranch and this man who kept her coffee warm without being asked were real and present. She heard Wesley come up the porch steps. She heard him stop. She turned. He was standing in the doorway, not quite inside, and his expression was the kind that you wear when you've seen something outside that you're deciding how to present. There's a man at the gate, he said. Came in on the early stage from what I can tell. He's asking for you. Lydia looked at him. She already knew. She could feel it the way you feel certain things before you know them, in the specific weight of her own breath. What does he look like? She said. Tall, dark coat. Looks like he's been traveling. Wesley paused. He said your name. Lydia Hartwell. The kitchen was warm. Clara was still asleep in the back room. The coffee was made and the morning was clear and the east wall of the barn would need fixing today. Lydia set down her cup. That's my husband, she said. Something went through Wesley's face. Not jealousy, nothing so simple. More like the expression of a man watching something arrive that he'd known was coming and had hoped to be more ready for. Do you want me to? He started. No, Lydia said. I'll go. She put on her coat. She felt the letter in the pocket against her fingers. She thought about the platform in November. The cold, the dark. The moment she'd stopped believing anything would come. She thought about the woman she'd been on that platform. She thought about the woman who'd gotten two spooked horses into a barn in a storm by herself because there was no one else to do it. She went to the door. She looked back at Wesley, who was still standing with his hand on the doorframe, watching her in that level, careful way. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I just need to say something to him. Something in Wesley's face settled, just slightly. I'll be here, he said. She walked out into the clean morning air and down the porch steps. The steps she'd fixed, that still held. And across the yard toward the gate, where Robert Hartwell was standing with his hat in his hands, looking at the ranch the way men look at things they've convinced themselves they deserve. He saw her coming, and his face moved into the expression she remembered, the one that had always been half charm and half apology, as if he was sorry in advance for whatever was coming, but couldn't quite stop himself. Lydia, he said. She stopped a few feet from him. She looked at him for a long moment, at the face she'd known, at the hat turning in his hands. Robert, she said. The morning was very still. Behind her, she knew without looking, Wesley was at the doorway. She hadn't planned what she was going to say, but when she opened her mouth, she found it was already there, clear and cold and entirely her own. I got your letter, she said, and I have some things to tell you. Robert Hartwell had the kind of face that photographed well. She'd thought that even when she married him, that he looked like the kind of man a woman was supposed to want, square-jawed and dark-eyed and capable of an expression that suggested depth without necessarily containing it. Standing at the gate of the Carter Ranch with his hat in his hands and the clean post-storm morning around him, he looked exactly as she remembered, and that was the first thing that unsettled her. She'd expected time to have changed him in some visible way. It hadn't. He just looked like Robert. "You look well," he said. "I am well," Lydia said. He glanced past her toward the house. His eyes moved over the yard, the barn, the fence line, and she recognized the assessment in it. The way he'd always cataloged a room when he entered it, filing things into categories of useful and not useful. "This is where you landed," he said. "This is where I live," she said. The distinction was deliberate, and he caught it. "Lydia, let me finish," she said. "I told you I had things to say, and I do. You can talk when I'm done." He closed his mouth, turned his hat once in his hands. "I got your letter," she said. "I read it 3 times, which was probably 2 more than it deserved. You wrote that you're a different man. You wrote that you've been thinking. You wrote that you miss Clara." She looked at him steadily. "You wrote a lot of things in 3 paragraphs, Robert, and none of them mentioned what you actually did." "I know what I did." "You left," she said. "You packed a bag while I was at work, and you walked out of our apartment, and you left me with a 6-month-old baby and $4 and a landlord who was already 2 weeks behind on patients. You didn't leave a note. You didn't send word. You were just gone." She kept her voice level. Not because she wasn't angry. She was. She could feel it sitting in her chest like a coal. But because she'd learned that anger delivered quietly landed harder. "Clara is almost 3 years old. She doesn't know you exist. And you sat in Cincinnati for 2.5 years before it occurred to you to find out where we were." Robert's jaw was tight. He was doing the thing he'd always done when confronted. Not getting angry exactly, but going somewhere internal, somewhere she couldn't reach, which had always been more frustrating than anger would have been. "Neither was I," Lydia said. "I was in a significantly worse place than you, as a matter of fact. I had your child." "I know that." "Then say it like you know it." He looked at her. There was something in his face that was real. She had to acknowledge that. Not performed, something that had actually cost him something to bring here. "I was wrong," he said. "What I did was wrong. I was scared and I ran and I left you with everything, and it was wrong, and I've known it every day since." She let that sit. "All right," she said. "I want to make it right," he said. "That's why I'm here. I want my family back." Lydia looked at the mountains for a moment. The snow on the peaks was bright in the morning sun. "You don't have a family to get back," she said. "You had one and you left it. What's here now is something I built. Something Clara and I built." She paused. "You can't come back to something you weren't part of making." Robert looked at the house again. "Who is he?" said. "My employer," Lydia said. "And a decent man." "It doesn't look like just employment," Robert said. And there was an edge in it now. Not ugly, not yet, but present. "What it looks like to you," Lydia said, "is not my concern." Well, she brought him inside. She did it because she was not the kind of woman who conducted important conversations in a yard where anyone passing on the road could watch, and because Clara was inside and Clara was the center of this, whatever else it was. Wesley was in the kitchen. He'd made more coffee. He stood when they came in, not theatrical, just the automatic courtesy of a man who'd been raised to stand when someone entered, and looked at Robert Hartwell with the particular quality of attention he gave things he was genuinely assessing. "Wesley Carter," he said, and put his hand out. Robert shook it. The handshake was a whole conversation. Lydia watched them both and saw it. "Robert Hartwell," Robert said. "I know," Wesley said. He said it without inflection, then moved toward the door. "I'll be outside." "You don't have to," Lydia started. "I've got the east wall to fix," Wesley said. He picked up his work gloves from the table. He looked at Lydia once, just a look, plain and steady, the kind that said, "I'm here if you need me, and I'll be somewhere else so you can do what you need to do." And then he went out. The door closed. Robert watched it close. "He's in love with you," Robert said. "Robert," Lydia said, "I'm not saying it as an accusation. I'm saying, I heard what you said." She pulled out a chair at the table and sat, and after a moment he sat too. Clara is asleep in the back room. When she wakes up, I'll introduce you. But I want to be clear about what that means and what it doesn't mean." He looked at her. "It means she gets to meet her father," Lydia said. "It doesn't mean you have standing to make decisions about her life. It doesn't mean I'm coming back to Cincinnati. It doesn't mean anything yet, except that she's going to see your face, and I want her to do that with some context, not just a stranger appearing." "What will you tell her?" "The truth, in the version appropriate for a 2-year-old. That you're her papa, that you've been away, that you came to see her." She folded her hands on the table. "What I won't tell her is that you're staying, because you're not staying. You'll see her today and we'll talk about what comes next, and what comes next is going to be decided by me, not by you. Do you understand?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. "You've gotten harder," he said. "I've gotten clearer," Lydia said. "It's not the same thing." He looked at his hands on the table, at the rough surface of the wood, the coffee rings, the small marks of a working life. "This isn't what I expected," he said. Not bitterly, just honestly. "What did you expect?" He was quiet. "I don't know," he said. "Something more. I thought you'd be worse off. I thought—" He stopped. "You thought you'd come find me in trouble and fix it," Lydia said, "and it would balance out." He didn't answer, which was its own answer. "I'm not in trouble," Lydia said. "For the first time in 3 years, I'm not in trouble." Clara woke up 40 minutes later, and Lydia went to get her before she could come wandering out on her own, which Clara was fully capable of doing and would have done directly to the nearest interesting thing, which would have been the unfamiliar man at the table. She crouched down in the back room to Clara's level while the child was still in that soft, warm, not quite awake state. "There's someone in the kitchen," Lydia said. "A man I know. His name is Robert." Clara rubbed her eye. "He's your papa," Lydia said. "Do you know what a papa is?" Clara thought about this with the serious consideration she gave important questions. "Pearl's papa," she said. Pearl Caswell's husband, John. Clara had decided he was Pearl's papa because she'd seen them together and drawn her own conclusions. "Yes," Lydia said. "Like that. Your papa. He came a long way to see you." Clara took a moment with this. "Okay," she said, with the pragmatic acceptance of a child who has been presented with sufficient information. Lydia carried her out. Robert stood up from the table when he saw her. He did it instinctively, before he'd thought about it, and in his face was something that had nothing performed about it, something that was plainly, unmistakably, a man seeing his child for the first time in 2 years and understanding completely what he'd done. Clara looked at him from Lydia's arms. Her assessment was thorough. "You have a big coat," Clara said. Robert blinked. He almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. "I do," he said. "Why?" "It was cold on the train," he said. Clara nodded. This was reasonable. "Cal has a big coat," she said. "Horse coat." "I didn't know that," Robert said. "Cal is big," Clara said. "You're not as big as Cal." "That's probably true." Clara looked at her mother, then back at Robert. "Mama said you're my papa," she said. "Yes," Robert said. His voice had gone rough at the edges. Clara appeared to receive this information, store it, and move on, the way children do. Not because it wasn't significant, but because they process significance differently, not in the moment, but in the days after, in small questions that arrive without warning. "Do you like chickens?" Clara asked. Robert looked at Lydia. Lydia kept her face neutral. "I've never spent much time with them," Robert said. "We have chickens," Clara said. "I can show you." The hardest part of the morning was watching them in the yard. Lydia stood at the kitchen window with her coffee and watched Robert following Clara through the chicken yard, and Clara pointing at each chicken with the authority of an expert and explaining things. And Robert crouched down to her level, listening with an expression that was completely unguarded in a way she hadn't seen on his face in years. Wesley came around from the east side of the barn at some point and stopped when he saw them. He looked at the two of them, father and daughter, and then his eyes found Lydia at the window, and she couldn't read the look from that distance, but she held it. He went back to the wall. She washed the cups and tried not to feel the particular vertigo of having 2 separate lives occupying the same physical space. Robert came inside an hour later. Clara had stayed outside, absorbed in some project involving the wooden horse and the fence rail. He sat down. He didn't say anything for a moment. "She's remarkable," he said. Yes, Lydia said. You did that. We both... She stopped. Yes, I did. He looked at the table. I know I don't have the right to just walk back in, he said. I understand that. But I'd like to know her, if you'd let me. He paused. I've got work in Billings, a foreman position at a freight company. It's steady. I'm not the same man who... Robert, Lydia said. I believe you that you've changed. I'm willing to believe that because the alternative, that you haven't changed at all, is too depressing to sit with. She folded her hands. But changed or not, you can't be your father from Billings, and also from Cincinnati. You have to decide where you're going to be. I thought, if you came back, I told you, I'm not going back. Then Montana, he said. I could... Don't make promises today, Lydia said. You've been here 3 hours. Don't make promises that are 3 hours old. She said it not unkindly, but firmly. Write to me from Billings. Come back in the summer when the roads are good. Show Clara you can stay. He was quiet for a long time. Is there anything for me here? He said. I mean, is there any... He looked toward the window, toward where Wesley was visible at the barn wall. Any chance? Lydia looked at him. She thought about what was honest. She owed him honesty. Not the kindness of vagueness, not the cruelty of false hope. No, she said. Not in the way you mean. I don't know what's here yet. I'm still figuring that out. But it's not with you, Robert. I think we both know that. She paused. That's not the same as saying you can't be her father. Those are separate things. He nodded, slowly. Okay, he said. He left after lunch. Lydia made a meal. There was bread and cold meat, and she put it on the table without ceremony. And Robert ate, and Clara sat beside him and told him at some length about the storm from the night before, with particular attention to the part where the horses were frightened, and Robert listened to all of it and asked questions, and it was ordinary and strange simultaneously. Wesley ate too, at the same table, and the meal was quiet in a way that took some effort to maintain, but that everyone maintained. When the stage came through at 2 o'clock, Robert was at the gate with his bag. Clara had been told he was leaving. She'd taken this with the same pragmatic acceptance she'd shown everything about him. She stood at Lydia's side and looked at him with that particular serious face. You coming back? She asked. Robert crouched down. Yes, he said. I'm going to come back. Clara appeared to weigh this. Okay, she said. He looked at her for a moment, and then he looked up at Lydia over Clara's head, and whatever had needed to pass between them passed. Thank you, he said. For letting me... Go catch your stage, Lydia said. He went. The afternoon settled. Clara napped. Lydia sat on the porch steps with her hands in her lap and the mountains in front of her, and tried to locate herself in the middle of the day, the way you do after something large has passed through. Wesley came and sat beside her on the steps. Not close, just present. They didn't say anything for a while. She asked him if he was coming back, Lydia said finally. He said yes. Will he? I think so, Lydia said. I think he means it this time. Whether meaning it and doing it are the same thing for him, I genuinely don't know. They weren't before. What will you do if he does? Let him be her father, Lydia said. That's all he can be now, but she deserves that much. Wesley looked at the road where the stage had gone. You handled that well, he said. I don't know if I handled it, Lydia said. I just did it. He looked at her sideways. You could have turned him away at the gate. Yes, she said. But then Clara would spend the rest of her life wondering what her father was like. And I'd be the one who kept her from knowing. That's too heavy a thing to carry. You think a lot about what she'll carry, Wesley said. It's all I think about, Lydia said. She didn't choose any of this. The least I can do is make sure the choices I make for her are the ones she'd make for herself if she could. Wesley was quiet. Marin would have been like that, he said. He said it almost to himself, looking at the ground. She used to think that way, about the people around her, about what they'd need before they knew they needed it. Lydia looked at him. He became aware of what he'd said and where he'd said it. He didn't retract it, but he shifted slightly. I'm not, he started. I know, Lydia said. He looked at her. I know, she said again quietly. You don't have to explain. He looked back at the mountains. I miss her, he said. Very flat, very factual. The way he said all the hard things, without ornamentation, because ornamentation cost him something he didn't have. I know you do, Lydia said, and I can see that you're different from her. I'm not confusing anything. Wesley, she said, I know. He looked at his hands on his knees. I don't say things right, he said. I never have. Maren used to... He stopped, started again. She used to say I needed a translator. You say things fine, Lydia said. You just say less of them than most people. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. That's a generous way to put it, he said. Garrett Holt came back 6 days after Robert Hartwell left, and this time he didn't come alone and he didn't bother with pleasantries. There were 4 of them. Holt, his hired man with the narrow face, and 2 others she didn't know. One of them had the bearing of a minor legal official, carrying a leather satchel and wearing a coat that was trying too hard. And the other was large and quiet in the way that men are when their function is to stand somewhere and look like a problem. They arrived on a Monday morning when Wesley had gone into Mill Haven for supplies. Lydia was in the yard when she heard them coming and stood her ground, one hand on the fence post, watching them pull up. Mrs. Hartwell, Holt said. That small, fixed smile. I was hoping to catch Wesley, but you'll do. He's not here, Lydia said, and whatever you have to say to him, you can say when he's back. Holt gestured to the man with the satchel, who stepped forward and produced a document. Mr. Carter is in arrears on a loan, the man said. He had the practiced voice of someone who delivered bad news professionally. The note was held by Millhaven Savings and has been acquired by Mr. Holt's company as of last month. The terms require payment in full within 30 days, or the property is subject to claim. Lydia looked at the document. She didn't reach for it. What company? She said. Western Territorial Holdings, the man said. That's Holt's company. Mr. Holt has business interests, yes. Lydia looked at Holt. He had settled into the comfortable posture of a man watching something inevitable happen. He bought Wesley's debt, she said. Not a question, stating it so she could hear it clearly. A legitimate business transaction, the man said. And the 30 days, when does that start? It started 15 days ago, Holt said pleasantly, when the acquisition was complete, so there are 15 days remaining. Lydia didn't move. How much? She said. The outstanding principal is $420, the man said, plus interest. She looked at Holt. You've been waiting for this, she said. The land, the debt? You've been waiting for the right moment. I've been patient, Holt said. Wesley Carter has had 4 years to sell at a fair price. He chose not to. Circumstances change. $420 is not a price, Lydia said. It's a weapon. Holt's smile didn't change. You have 15 days, he said. Tell Wesley I'd still prefer to handle this quietly. He knows where to find me. They rode out. Lydia stood in the yard for a long time after they left. The morning was bright and still and indifferent to what had just happened in it. A chicken crossed the yard. Somewhere in the barn, Calhoun stamped once. She went inside and sat at the table and looked at the wall and thought, $420, 15 days. She thought about what Wesley had said. Things are tight, not desperate. She thought about the account papers on his table. She thought about Holt's face, that patience in it, the patience of a man who had been arranging something for a long time and was now watching it arrive. She got up. She went to the shelf where Wesley kept his papers, and she stood in front of it for a moment, aware that she was looking at something private. Then she thought about 15 days and opened the ledger. She was not an accountant, but she'd kept her own accounts since she was 18. A woman living alone with a child learned to track money with precision or she didn't survive. And she could read a ledger. She went through it carefully, page by page. Wesley was not broke, but $420 was not something he had sitting somewhere waiting. The ranch operated on margins that left no such reserve. After feed, upkeep, the loan payments he'd been making regularly, the small wage he paid her, there was nothing left that would cover it. She closed the ledger and put it back. She sat down again and thought about Maren, who had died in February and taken the child with her, and about Wesley carrying 4 years of this ranch alone. The debt accumulating the way debt does when you're working too hard to look at it directly. She thought about Holt watching from 10 miles east, patient, waiting for the number to get large enough. She thought about what she knew how to do. She was in the kitchen when Wesley came back from Mill Haven that afternoon, and she told him immediately. She'd learned already that delaying difficult news was a cruelty she wouldn't inflict. She told him what Holt's man had said. She told him the number and the days remaining and the name of the company. She told him she'd read the ledger, and she said that directly, without apology, because there wasn't time for anything except the truth. Wesley sat down. He was quiet for a long time. He bought the note, he said finally, 3 weeks ago, from what the man said. While he was coming here talking about the East Field, Wesley's voice was flat. While he was sending his man to watch. Yes. He put his hands on the table. She could see the control in it, the deliberate placement, the effort of sitting still with something large. I can't cover it, he said. I know. I can't sell the East Field in 15 days, even if I... You're not selling the East Field, Lydia said. He looked at her. He wants you to feel like there's no option, she said. That's the whole point of the 15 days. It's a designed window, short enough that you can't raise the money honestly, but long enough that he can claim he gave you a chance. She'd been thinking it through all afternoon, pacing the kitchen while Clara napped. He's done this before. I'd bet on it. There'll be a pattern. What do you mean, a pattern? Men like Holt don't invent new schemes, Lydia said. They find something that works and they repeat it. If he acquired your debt, he's acquired other debts, other ranches. We need to find out who else he's done this to. Wesley looked at her. And then what? He said. Then we find out if what he's doing is legal, Lydia said. Buying debt is legal. Manipulating the terms, changing what was agreed, isn't. The original note had terms. If Holt's company changed anything when they acquired it, that's a different matter. I'm not a lawyer, Wesley said. Neither am I, Lydia said. But there's a land office in Billings, and there's a territorial court, and there's Pearl's husband, who's been here 15 years and knows every rancher in the valley. She paused. You're not in this alone. Wesley looked at her for a long moment. There was something she couldn't quite name in his face. Not relief exactly, because relief was premature, and he wasn't a man who felt things prematurely, but something that was adjacent to it. The look of a man who has been carrying something in both hands for a very long time and has just been told he can set it down for a moment. Why are you doing this? He said. It was a genuine question, not defensive, just honest. Lydia thought about the platform in November, about 43 cents and a sleeping child and the cold, about what she'd said to him in this kitchen on her first morning here. I'm not doing it because I have to. Because this is where I live, she said, and people who live somewhere protect it. He held her gaze. All right, he said. Pearl Caswell came the next morning, and Lydia had barely finished explaining before Pearl was already listing names. 3 ranchers in the valley who'd had dealings with Holt in the past 2 years, 2 of them having sold land under pressure, 1 of them having lost property after a debt acquisition that moved faster than anyone had expected. John Caswell, who said little but listened to everything, sat at the kitchen table with his forearms on the wood and confirmed each name with a brief nod. Ed Fogarty lost his north pasture that way, John said. 18 months ago. He tried to fight it, but he didn't have anyone helping him, and Holt had the paperwork in order. What would help him most? Wesley said. Finding the original terms of the note, John said. If Holt changed anything, interest rate, payment schedule, anything, when he acquired it, that's fraud. The territorial court takes that seriously. Where's the original note? Lydia asked. Wesley went to the shelf. He found it in the back of a folder, behind the ledger, a document he'd signed 6 years ago at Millhaven Savings, in the careful hand of a bank officer who'd since retired and moved east. He brought it to the table. They spread it out. The original terms were clear. Lydia read them carefully, then read the document Holt's man had given her, which she'd kept. She found it on the second page. The interest rate, she said. She put her finger on the line. The original note is at 6%. Holt's document is computing at 8%. The table went quiet. 2%? John said. On $420 compounded. It's not the number, Lydia said. It's the fact. He changed the terms when he acquired it. That's not legal. Wesley looked at the 2 documents side by side. He thought I wouldn't read it carefully, he said, or that I wouldn't have the original. He counted on you being frightened and short on time, Lydia said. That's his whole method. Pearl looked at her husband. John looked at Wesley. Ed Fogarty will want to know this, John said. And the Hendersons. If Holt's been doing this across the valley, then there's more than one case, Lydia said, and more than one person with standing to bring it. Wesley looked at Lydia. You read it, he said. You found it. I was looking for it, she said. That's the only difference. The following days moved with the specific urgency of people who have a deadline and a direction. John Caswell rode to Ed Fogarty's place and came back with Fogarty's original loan documents, which showed the same discrepancy, a rate changed by 2.5% in Holt's documentation. The Hendersons sent word through Pearl that they'd kept everything and would come to a meeting. Wesley rode to Billings with John on a Thursday, taking both sets of documents, and came back the following evening with the name of a territorial attorney who specialized in land and debt disputes and had agreed to review the case. Lydia kept the ranch running in his absence with a competence that would have surprised her 4 months ago and didn't surprise her now at all. She fed the horses, managed the chickens, kept Clara from making unilateral decisions about which animals required closer inspection, patched a section of fence that had been weakened in the storm, and cooked 3 meals a day, and made sure there was something warm when Wesley came back on Friday evening, looking tired and cautious, and something else she chose not to examine too closely. Pemberton, the attorney, he says the case is strong, Wesley said, sitting at the table with his coat still on because he'd just come in and hadn't taken it off yet. He's seen this pattern before. 3 ranches, the same rate manipulation. He says that establishes intent. How long? Lydia said. To build the case, file it properly, 4 to 6 weeks. He's filing for an injunction on the 15-day deadline first. That gives us time. Lydia sat down across from him. It's not over, Wesley said. Holt will fight it. He has lawyers and money, and he's not going to— I know, Lydia said. But he doesn't have the original documents, and he doesn't know we've already talked to Fogarty and the Hendersons. Wesley looked at her. He thought I was alone, he said. You weren't, Lydia said. You just didn't know who was standing next to you yet. Clara came padding in from the back room, dragging the wooden horse by one leg, wearing the expression of someone who has just woken from a nap and has not yet made peace with the world. Wesley, she said, with the solemnity of a judge delivering a verdict. Clara, Wesley said. You were gone, she said. I was, he said. I'm back. Clara assessed this for a moment. Then she climbed up onto the chair next to him. She could do it herself now, had been able to for a month, and was fiercely proud of this capability, and settled herself and put the wooden horse on the table between them. Cal missed you, she said. I told him you were coming back. Did he believe you? Yes, Clara said, with perfect confidence. Wesley looked at the horse, at Clara's hands, small and certain on the table. His face was doing the thing it did, the door opening and then closing, but a little slower this time. Lydia watched him look at her daughter and felt something settle in her chest, like the last piece of a thing coming to rest. She got up and went to the stove to put the kettle on, and the kitchen was warm and the evening was coming down outside. And somewhere in Billings, a territorial attorney was reading the original terms of a loan that Garrett Holt had believed no one would ever look at closely enough to matter. He'd been wrong about that. He'd been wrong about a lot of things. The injunction came through on a Wednesday, 8 days before Holt's deadline expired. Wesley got the telegram from Pemberton's office in Billings in the afternoon, and he came in from the road holding it with the careful stillness of a man who has learned not to trust good news until he's read it twice. He set it on the table and Lydia read it standing beside him, and when she finished, she read it again, and the second time the words settled into something real. Injunction granted. Deadline suspended pending territorial court review. Hearing scheduled 6 weeks hence. Original loan terms to govern until resolution. Holt's counsel notified. 6 weeks. It wasn't over. Pemberton had said it plainly. Holt would contest, would bring his own attorneys, would attempt to establish that the rate change was a clerical matter rather than an intentional alteration. These things took time and were not guaranteed. But the 15-day window was gone, dissolved by a territorial judge who had read the same 2 documents side by side and reached the same conclusion Lydia had reached at the kitchen table. It worked, Wesley said. Not triumphant, just quiet. It's a start, Lydia said. He looked at her. You knew it would, he said. I hoped it would, she said. That's not the same thing. She handed the telegram back to him, and he folded it with the same care he gave all important papers. And she thought about the version of this morning that could have existed, the one where Holt had arrived at a ranch without the original loan document, without anyone who'd thought to read the fine print, without John Caswell riding to Fogarty's property and coming back with a folder that had been sitting in a drawer for 18 months, waiting for someone to ask for it. Small things. The difference between losing and not losing was so often just small things. The document kept, the drawer not cleaned out, the woman who sat down with a ledger because she couldn't let herself do nothing. Clara came in from outside with dirt on both knees and a look of profound satisfaction. Found a worm, she announced. What did you do with it? Lydia asked. Clara looked slightly evasive. Put it back. Where it was. A pause. Near there. Lydia decided this was sufficient. Wesley was looking at Clara with the expression that had stopped being almost a smile and had become, somewhere in the past few weeks, something more settled, something that lived in his face more comfortably, like it had found a place to stay. The 6 weeks before the hearing were not peaceful. Nothing about what Holt was doing allowed for peace, and he was not a man who accepted legal setbacks with grace. He had 3 attorneys working by the end of the first week, and word came through Pemberton that his strategy was to challenge the authenticity of Wesley's original loan document, to claim that the bank's records, not Wesley's copy, were the authoritative version, and that if there was a discrepancy, the error was in the document Wesley held. Pemberton was not alarmed by this, which alarmed Lydia slightly, because she had learned that lawyers were most alarmed by things they hadn't anticipated and most calm about things they had. It's standard, Pemberton wrote in his letter. They'll argue the document, we argue the pattern. 3 ranches with the same discrepancy is not clerical error, it is method. The court understands method. She read the letter to Wesley at the table. He listened without interrupting. Can he get the bank officer? Wesley said. The man who wrote the original note, he retired, moved east. Pemberton's already trying to locate him, Lydia said. If he can testify about what the original terms were, what he wrote, that ends the document argument. And if he can't find him? Then we rely on the pattern, Lydia said. Fogarty, Henderson, you. 3 sets of documents with the same change in the same direction. That's not coincidence. Wesley was quiet for a moment. Holt knows we have the other ranchers, he said. Yes. That's why he's going after the document, Wesley said. He can't explain the pattern, so he wants to make everything uncertain. Make the judge feel like he can't be sure of anything. That's exactly right, Lydia said. She looked at him. You understand this. I understand men like Holt, Wesley said. I've known him for years. The land thing, the debt thing. It's the same move, different game. He makes the situation complicated enough that the other person loses faith in their own position. He put his hands flat on the table. I almost did. When they wrote up that Monday, I almost thought, maybe there's no point. But you didn't walk away from the East Field, Lydia said. No. And you kept the original loan document in a folder on a shelf for 6 years instead of throwing it out. Marin kept it, Wesley said. She kept everything. I just didn't clear it out. Lydia looked at the shelf where the papers lived. Then she helped, Lydia said. In a way. Wesley was quiet for a long time. Yes, he said finally. She did. John Caswell rode to 3 other properties in the valley over the following 2 weeks and came back each time with more. Not all of them involved debt. One was a boundary dispute that had been resolved suspiciously in Holt's favor. One was a water rights matter, but the shape of it was consistent. Holt identified properties he wanted, found the pressure point, debt, a dying spouse, a bad harvest year, and applied it with patience and precision. Ed Fogarty came to the ranch one afternoon on his own, without being asked, and sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee and told Wesley directly that he wished he'd had someone helping him when Holt had come for his north pasture. He was a lean, weathered man in his 60s, with the hands of someone who'd been working land since he was a boy, and he didn't dramatize what had happened to him. He just laid it out plainly, the way men who've been hurt without recourse talk about it, factually, because the facts are damning enough. He gave me 11 days, Fogarty said. My wife had just died. I couldn't think straight, and he knew it. I signed it over, and I've regretted it every day since. You'll be able to say that in court, Lydia said. Fogarty looked at her. That'll count, he said. Pattern evidence counts, Lydia said. Pemberton says so, and I believe him. Fogarty looked at Wesley. She always like this? He said. Pretty much, Wesley said. Fogarty nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. He finished his coffee and shook Wesley's hand and nodded to Lydia with the brief, genuine respect of someone who doesn't give it easily, and went back to his property. Robert wrote from Billings in mid-May. The letter was short and careful. She could feel him measuring every sentence, aware that he was writing to someone who would read between the lines, whether he wanted her to or not. He'd found work. The freight company position was real and solid. He was looking at lodgings that weren't temporary. He asked after Clara. He asked, with notable brevity, how Lydia was. He did not ask to come back. He did not make promises about the summer. He just wrote. She thought about that for a while, about the restraint in it, which was not something she'd associated with Robert. Restraint was something he'd never had much use for. The fact that the letter had it meant either that he'd genuinely changed in some way, or that he was being careful because he understood that careless moves had costs. She wrote back. She told him Clara was well, that she was talking more, full sentences now, not all of them intelligible, but delivered with absolute conviction. That she'd decided Cal the horse was her best friend and had been conducting what appeared to be a fairly one-sided but deeply satisfying friendship with him over the fence rail every morning. That she was going to be 3 in July. She told him the ranch was in the middle of a legal matter that she couldn't explain briefly. She told him the ranch was fine. She told him she was fine. She did not tell him what she was beginning to understand about what she wanted because she was still figuring that out, and it wasn't something she intended to discuss with Robert Hartwell before she'd discussed it with herself. She sealed the letter and gave it to Pearl to post on her next trip to town. Pearl took it without comment, but she looked at Lydia with the particular expression she wore when she was exercising significant self-restraint. "I'm not saying anything," Pearl said. "I know you're not," Lydia said. The court hearing in Billings was on a Thursday in late June, and Wesley and Lydia rode up together on the Wednesday, leaving Clara with Pearl and John, who had offered without being asked the way good people do when they understand something is important. Clara had accepted this arrangement with the seriousness of a field general delegating authority. She'd given Lydia a list of instructions regarding Cal's morning oats and the specific location of the wooden horse, which she required to sleep, and had then told Lydia to go and come back, which was the most efficient farewell Lydia had ever received. The ride to Billings took most of the day. They stopped at noon to rest the horses and eat the food Pearl had packed, sitting on the ground beside a creek that was still running cold from snowmelt, and the mountains were visible to the west, and the sky was the particular blue that June produced in Montana, which was a color Lydia still hadn't entirely made peace with because it was too large and too clean and made a person feel both small and clarified simultaneously. "Are you scared?" she asked Wesley. He thought about it honestly, which was the only way he thought about things. "Not of losing," he said. "I've lost things. You survive it." He pulled a piece of grass from the ground and looked at it. "I'm scared of what it means if Holt gets away with it. Not just for me. For Fogarty. For the Hendersons. For the next person he finds in a bad year." "Pemberton thinks we have it," Lydia said. "Pemberton gets paid either way," Wesley said, but without bitterness. "He found the bank officer," Lydia said. "A letter from a retired man in Pennsylvania who wrote down exactly what interest rate he put in that note. That's not nothing." "No," Wesley said. "It's not nothing." She looked at the creek, at the way it moved, not dramatically, just consistently, finding the path it needed and following it. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said, "you didn't let him take it quietly. You stood up and you had people standing with you. That's already different from what he expected." Wesley looked at her. "You made that happen," he said. "We made it happen," Lydia said. He was quiet for a moment. The creek moved. A bird crossed the sky above them. She didn't know what kind. She was still learning Montana birds. And was gone. "Lydia," he said. "Yes." He stopped. She waited. "I'm not good at this," he said. "At what?" He looked at the grass in his hands, at the ground, at some middle distance that was easier than her face. "Saying the thing," he said. "I've never been... Marin used to do it for both of us. She'd know what I meant before I got it into words, and she'd say it, and then I'd just... Agree. And it worked. He paused. I don't have that anymore. I have to do it myself, and I don't do it right. Wesley, Lydia said carefully. I know you might leave, he said. I know Robert is in Billings, and I know you're still, legally, and I know Clara deserves her father, and I'm not saying any of that shouldn't be how it is. He finally looked at her. I'm saying that when I come back from the barn and you're in the kitchen, I'm not braced anymore. I used to brace myself for the kitchen being empty. For 4 years, I'd come in and it'd just be the room, and now it's not. He stopped. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't know what to do with it. Lydia looked at him for a long moment, at the face that had spent 4 years outside in Montana weather and carried something heavy every day of those years, and had still, somehow, stopped a horse and climbed down and offered what he had to a woman sitting alone in the cold. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I know you said that before, he said, when Robert came. I meant it then, and I mean it now, she said. It's not something I say to make people feel better. I've got no patience for that. She looked at the creek. When I left Cincinnati, I burned the bridge. I burned every bridge. I got on a train with 43 cents and a 2-year-old because I had nothing left where I was and I needed to get somewhere. She paused. I didn't know what I was going to. I just knew I had to go. She looked back at him. This is where I went, Wesley. I've been standing in your kitchen for 7 months and I know what it is by now. He held her gaze. I come in from the barn, he said slowly, and you're there. Yes, she said. And I don't want it to be different. Neither do I, she said. The creek moved. The mountains sat where they'd always sat. Neither of them said anything else about it. They didn't need to. They were both people who meant what they said and didn't require the same thing said 3 different ways. And after a moment, Wesley stood up and helped her up, and they got back on the horses and rode the rest of the way to Billings. And the thing between them was the same as it had been all morning, except that it had been named, and named things are different from unnamed things, even when nothing else has changed. The territorial courthouse in Billings was a brick building that smelled of old wood and paper and the specific staleness of official proceedings, and Lydia sat in the gallery behind Pemberton and Wesley and Ed Fogarty and watched the morning unfold with the focused attention she gave anything that mattered. Holt's attorneys were better dressed than Pemberton. There were 2 of them, polished and prepared, and they moved through their opening arguments with the easy confidence of men who had won in rooms like this before. They argued the document question first, that the bank's records, which they had subpoenaed, showed the rate Holt's company had applied, that Wesley's copy was old and the ink faded, and that copies held by borrowers were frequently imprecise. Pemberton let them finish. Then he laid out the letter from the retired bank officer in Pennsylvania. The man's name was Harold Geddes, and he had retired to his daughter's farm after 40 years in banking, and he had, as Pemberton had requested, written a sworn statement about the loan he had processed for Wesley Carter in the spring of 6 years ago. He remembered it because he remembered Wesley, a young widower, he'd written, who had come in after losing his wife and needed to restructure to keep the ranch going. He had written the rate at 6% because that was the rate the bank offered, and he had put it in the note, and he said so plainly and under oath. The room was quiet when Pemberton finished reading it. Holt's lead attorney objected. Pemberton had expected the objection and had the territorial statutes ready. A sworn statement from a material witness was admissible. The judge, a compact, gray-haired man named Aldrich, who had been on the territorial bench for 11 years and had the look of someone who had stopped being impressed by polished attorneys around year 3, sustained the admissibility and told Holt's attorney to proceed with cross-examination, which he could not do because Geddes was in Pennsylvania. Then Pemberton called Ed Fogarty. Fogarty sat in the witness chair the way he sat everywhere, solidly, without adjustment, as if the chair was just another piece of ground he was standing on. He answered Pemberton's questions in short, complete sentences. He described what had happened with his north pasture. He produced his original loan document. He identified the discrepancy in Holt's version. Then the Henderson representative testified, 2.5% difference on their loan, same direction, same method. Lydia watched Holt from the gallery. He sat at his table with his attorneys and he was very still, not the comfortable stillness of a man who expected to win, but the rigid stillness of a man holding something in. Pemberton's closing argument was not dramatic. He was not a dramatic man. He laid the three cases side by side, named the discrepancy in each, noted that all three were in the same direction, always higher, never lower, and stated that a clerical error repeating itself 3 times in the same direction was not a clerical error. It was a choice. Judge Aldrich recessed for 2 hours. Lydia sat with Wesley in a corridor outside, on a hard bench that was not comfortable, and they didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. The thing had been said, the case had been made, and waiting was now the only occupation available. Wesley had his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the floor, and Lydia sat beside him and didn't try to fill the silence, because this was one of those silences that should stay what it was. Fogarty came and sat across from them and produced a piece of dried beef from his coat pocket and ate it without offering any, which Lydia found so entirely characteristic of the man that she almost smiled. When Judge Aldrich came back, he was brief. He found the pattern of rate alteration to constitute fraudulent misrepresentation under territorial statute. He voided Holt's claim on Wesley's note and ordered the debt returned to its original terms and holder, which, since Millhaven Savings had sold the note, meant the debt was effectively discharged pending resolution of the bank's position. He referred the matter of Fogarty's North Pasture to a separate proceeding. He ordered Holt's company to pay the court costs. He gave Holt's attorney exactly the look you give someone whose client has wasted the court's time, which was not a long look, but was comprehensive. Holt left without looking at Wesley. His attorneys followed. The door of the courtroom closed behind them, and the room exhaled. Wesley sat in his chair for a moment without moving. Pemberton leaned over and said something to him. Lydia couldn't hear what, and Wesley nodded once. Fogarty, across the aisle, looked at Lydia with the brief, direct look of a man who doesn't say thank you easily, but wanted her to know it was there. She nodded back. Wesley turned to look at her. His face was doing something she hadn't seen it do before, not controlled, not containing something, just open, in the specific way that comes when the thing you've been braced against doesn't happen. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she said. He looked at her for a moment longer. "Let's go home," he said. "Bus." They got back to the Caswell property as the sun was going down, and before the wagon had fully stopped, Clara came running from the yard with the specific flat-out sprint of a small child who has been waiting longer than they found reasonable. "Mama," she said, and hit Lydia at knee level with enough force that Lydia had to catch the wagon rail. "I'm here," Lydia said, lifting her. "I'm here, sweetheart." Clara grabbed her around the neck and then immediately leaned back to look at her face and make her assessment. Then she looked at Wesley, who had climbed down and was standing nearby. "You came back," Clara said to him. The same tone she'd used in April. The tone of a small judge reading a verdict she'd already known but needed confirmed. "I did," Wesley said. Clara appeared to consider this, then extended her arms toward him with the imperial certainty of someone who has decided they want to be held and does not expect to be refused. Wesley took her. He did it the way he'd learned to over the past months, one hand under her, one steadying, and Clara settled against his shoulder with the complete physical trust that children give to the people they've decided are safe. And Wesley stood in the Caswell yard in the going-down sun with this child on his shoulder, and his eyes went to some middle distance that had nothing to do with geography. Pearl was on the porch watching. Lydia looked at her. Pearl pressed her lips together and said nothing, which was the most extraordinary exercise of self-restraint Lydia had ever witnessed from her. The summer settled into the ranch the way summer does on the frontier, with heat and work and long light that lasted until 9 at night and made the days feel almost too full, like something being poured into a container that was the right size but barely. Lydia planted a kitchen garden in June, something she'd been thinking about since March, and Pearl gave her seed stock, and John Caswell came over one afternoon and turned the soil for her without being asked, and was gone before she could say much about it, which was his way. Wesley fixed the east barn wall properly in July. He spent 3 days on it, and Lydia handed things up to him when he needed them, and Clara sat on a hay bale and provided commentary that Wesley occasionally responded to, and by the end of the 3rd day the wall was solid. Not perfect, not new, but the kind of solid that means it's not going anywhere. He came down from the ladder and looked at it. "Should have done that last fall," he said. "You did it now," Lydia said. He looked at her sideways. "You do that," he said. "Do what?" Take the reasonable position on things. When I'm busy being hard on myself, you just say the thing that's actually true. I spent a long time being hard on myself, Lydia said. It didn't accomplish anything useful. He looked at the wall. Is that something you learned or something you always knew? Learned, she said. The hard way. Most useful things are. Robert came in August, as he'd said he would. He came on a Saturday and stayed 2 days, and he was quieter than he'd been in April. Not subdued, just more careful, as if he'd been practicing the version of himself he wanted to bring. He sat on the porch with Clara on Saturday morning, and she showed him things. The garden, the chickens, Cal over the fence rail, with the proprietary pride of a child showing someone around the world she'd built. And he followed and looked and listened, and he was good at it in a way that surprised Lydia. She watched from the garden and felt something she hadn't expected. Not jealousy of his ease with Clara, not resentment of his late arrival into her daughter's life, but something quieter and more complicated, something like relief. That he was capable of this. That Clara would have a father who could sit on a porch and follow her around and look at the things she showed him. That evening, while Clara was asleep, Robert sat in the kitchen with Lydia and Wesley and drank coffee, and the three of them had a conversation that was awkward in the way that necessary conversations are. Not hostile, not warm, just real. I want to come more regularly, Robert said. He addressed it to Lydia, but he was aware of Wesley. She could see that. He wasn't performing for Wesley or appealing to him. He was just aware of him the way you're aware of someone who has weight in a room. Every month, if you'll allow it. I want her to know me. Yes, Lydia said, if you make it work. I will. Robert, she said, I believe that you mean that. I need you to know that if you stop meaning it and you don't come, I won't cover for you. I won't tell her you're coming and you don't arrive. If you make a promise to her, you keep it. Robert looked at his cup. Understood, he said. She doesn't need to be protected from the truth, Lydia said. She's a resilient child, but she's also a child who will remember exactly what you said and exactly what you did. So mean what you say and do what you mean. Robert nodded. Wesley said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence in that kitchen was statement enough. A man who had been there every day for 8 months, who had lifted Clara over the fence rail and carved her a wooden horse and ridden to Billings to fight for his land and come back. Robert could see that. He was not a stupid man. Are you happy? Robert asked Lydia. Just that quietly, when Wesley had gone to check the horses before dark. Lydia thought about the question. Yes, she said. I think I am. It's not what I expected happiness to look like. It's less smooth than I thought it would be. She turned her cup in her hands. But it's real, and real beats smooth in my experience. Robert looked at the table. I'm glad, he said. And he meant it. She could tell when he meant things. That had always been her particular knowledge of him, the ability to read the register beneath the words. He meant it. Be her father, Robert, she said. That's enough. That's a full thing. In September, on a Sunday afternoon, with the first edge of fall in the air, and the garden coming to its end, and the mountains beginning to show early color at the tree line, Wesley asked her to marry him. He did not do it with ceremony. He was not a ceremonial man. He did it the way he did things that mattered, directly, without preamble, and with the specific weight of someone who had thought about it for a long time before speaking. They were outside. Clara had gone to sleep inside after lunch. The horses were in the paddock. The sky was doing something complex with light and cloud and the first suggestion of the season that was coming. He said, I'd like you to marry me, if that's something you'd consider. Lydia looked at him. He was standing at the fence rail with his hands on the top board, and he was looking at the horses because he was better with hard things when he had somewhere else to put his eyes. You're not asking because of what people in town say, she said. No. Or because of Clara. Clara is part of it, he said. She's part of everything around here, but she's not the reason. What's the reason? He turned to look at her. His face was doing the open thing, the thing it did when he stopped containing it and let it be what it was. I come in from the barn, he said, and you're there. I've told you that. I'm telling you again because it's the truest thing I know how to say about it. Before you were here, I came in from the barn, and I just kept going until it was late enough to sleep. I didn't know that was what I was doing. I do now. He paused. I don't want to go back to that. And I don't want you to be here without it being permanent. You deserve permanent. Lydia looked at the mountains. She thought about the platform in November. The cold, the dark. Clara's weight against her shoulder. The feeling of the world closing down to a single bench on a wooden platform with nothing coming. She thought about what had arrived instead of nothing. A man on a horse who'd noticed the things everyone else would have missed, who had not asked questions before offering what he had. She thought about what she'd built since, not what had been given to her, what she'd built. The curtain mended, the step fixed, the horses in the barn on the night of the storm, the original loan document found, the case made, the wall held. She thought about a 2-year-old girl who had no memory of being cold and scared on a platform because the woman holding her had decided, before she even knew how, that it was not the end. She thought about what permanent meant when you'd spent years without it. "You're not easy to know," she said to Wesley. "I know," he said. "You don't talk enough." "I know. And you leave the last spoonful in the bowl every single time, and I still don't know why." He blinked. "It's habit. My mother did it, said it kept the bowl from feeling empty." Lydia looked at him. He looked back. "Yes," she said. "I'll marry you." He exhaled, not dramatically, just the slow release of something held. "All right," he said. "All right," she agreed. Neither of them moved for a moment. The horses moved in the paddock. Cal tossed his head at something invisible and then went back to eating, because horses have priorities. "We should tell Clara," Lydia said. "She'll tell the horse," Wesley said. "Almost certainly. He'll deal with it." What? They were married in October at the Caswell house, because Pearl had insisted on it with a firmness that neither of them had the energy to resist, and because the Caswell house had room for the people who needed to be there. Ed Fogarty came. The Hendersons came. Pemberton came up from Billings, which surprised Wesley and clearly cost him something in travel time, and he shook Wesley's hand with the plain satisfaction of a man who was glad his cases ended this way. The county judge married them in John Caswell's front room, and it took 7 minutes, and Clara stood beside Lydia the whole time, holding the wooden horse. Afterward there was food. Pearl had cooked for 3 days, which was its own particular form of love. And the house was full of noise, and the particular warmth of a gathering of people who have been through something together and come out the other side. And Lydia stood for a moment in the doorway between the front room and the kitchen, watching all of it, and tried to locate the feeling she was having. It wasn't the feeling she'd expected on a wedding day. She'd had a wedding before, a quick, sparse one, the first time, in a room that nobody had decorated. And the feeling that day had been a kind of hopeful anxiety, a bet placed on uncertain odds. This felt different. It felt like something she already knew the outcome of. Not certain, not smooth. Life was never that, and she had stopped wanting it to be. But grounded. The way a wall is grounded after it's been fixed properly. Not perfect, not new, but not going anywhere. Wesley came to stand beside her. He had a cup of something, and he handed it to her without asking, and she took it. "Pearl's going to be insufferable about this," he said. "She's earned it," Lydia said. "Fair," he said. Clara was in the corner showing Fogarty the wooden horse with the intensity of a museum curator. Fogarty was listening with the expression of a man who did not have much experience with small children, but was doing his genuine best, which was, in Lydia's estimation, all anyone could be asked for. "Did you think it would be like this?" Wesley said. "Like what?" He looked at the room, at the people, at Clara in the corner and Pearl in the kitchen, and John Caswell leaning against the wall with his quiet, solid presence. "All of them," he said. "When I was alone out here, after Myron, I stopped expecting people to show up. I figured that was just the way of it. You get to a certain point, and the world's smaller." "And now?" Lydia said. He looked at her. "Now it's bigger," he said. She thought about what it took to believe that. After losing what he'd lost, after 4 years of a kitchen that was just a room, to still have enough left in him to climb down from a horse at a dark train station and say, "You'll never sleep outside again." Not because he was fearless or generous to some extraordinary degree, but because he was a man who noticed things and couldn't leave them. That was all. It was enough. "It's bigger," she agreed. There is a particular thing that happens to women who survive the frontier, not the romantic version of surviving, which involves no actual inconvenience, but the real kind, which involves 43 cents and a bench in the cold and the slow, grinding work of making something from less than nothing. What happens is that they stop waiting for someone to tell them what they're worth. Not because they've given up on people. If anything, they value people more, having learned which ones stand when it matters. But because they've seen, through the doing of it, that worth is not assigned, it is demonstrated, daily. In small actions that nobody notices, and large ones that cost something, and all the ones in between. Lydia Hartwell had believed, on a platform in November with nothing left and a child against her shoulder, that she was asking too much of the world, that the thing she needed, not rescue, but a fair chance, was somehow more than she had the right to. She had been wrong about that. Not because the world turned out to be generous. The world was neither generous nor cruel. It was simply itself, with all the weight and weather that entailed, but because what she'd thought was asking too much turned out to be exactly the right amount. One man who climbed down from a horse, one shelf with the right paper on it, one original document with the right number written in ink that hadn't faded, one woman who carried a 2-year-old 4 months through a Montana winter and built, from that, something worth fighting for. Clara grew up on the Carter Ranch. She learned to ride before she was 5. She never lost her habit of reporting important information to Cal, who remained, until his old age, the most trusted confidant she had. Robert came every month through the first year and every season after that, and kept his word in the way that people sometimes do when they've learned what the cost of not keeping it is. And Clara grew up knowing her father without needing him to be the center of her story. The East Field was never sold. The barn wall stood for 30 years before it needed replacing, and when it was finally rebuilt, the new wood went up alongside the old, and the old was left where it was, because nobody saw any reason to take out something that had held. Lydia remembered the platform. She remembered it the way you remember a place you passed through on the way to somewhere else. Not with longing, not with bitterness, just with the clear-eyed recognition that it was part of the distance traveled. The cold of it, the dark, the feeling of having reached the absolute limit of what she could carry. And then the sound of hooves, not rescue, not a story with a clean arc and a moral that fits in a sentence. Just a man who noticed, and a woman who was still standing when he did. And all the ordinary and extraordinary days that followed, neither smooth nor perfect, built on ground that held. That was enough. That was, as it turned out, everything.